Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about a 10-point plan to end mass shootings that the government needs to implement. Okay, it's not my priority to make sure that they implement this plan. They need to do that on their own. And I'm also going to discuss the top 10 causes of mass shootings. Okay, so let's start with the word basically. Here's some nice little wordplay for you. Basically. First part of the word is basic. And the second part is ally. So basically what's going on is people think a certain way, and they have loose alliances, and they also have very direct alliances. And it plays out in a certain way. We see that they are letting their complexes cause these massacres to occur. We see that we must logically consider the existing dynamic. For example, when we look at school shootings, even excessive coursework factors in. Because people who go to those schools, right, are very stressed out. People who've graduated, who go back to the school or go to a different school and do a shooting, that's part of their background stressors, right? People are stressed out. They're angry. They're confused. They're tired of being used, abused, and confused. And there's subconscious mental processes taking place, and there's conscious mental processes. But I'm going to keep this a lot more simple than that. So let's look at what groups failed before we even get to point one, really quickly. The following groups have failed to produce a potent and powerful public figure that leads people away from evil in a universal way that appeals to all people. So we need solid role models who are preferably people who appeal to everybody, but also people who appeal to certain types of groups. And we'll get to that. So who are the groups that have failed us? Freemasons, police, military, intelligence agencies, politicians, teachers, churches, mosques, synagogues, other religious movements, atheist movements, agnostic movements, rockers, skaters, jocks, celebrities, rappers, cowboys, other religious movements besides mine, that is. Farmers, goths, occultists, thugs, gangsters, Satanists, witches, boxers, MMA fighters, scientists, activists, racers, and more. Okay, so every group you can think of has failed to produce someone with universal appeal. I actually have universal appeal, but this video isn't about me. But I need you to understand that, to understand these 10 points and to understand the 10 causes of these mass shootings. So let's start with the 10 points that would end mass shootings to a large degree. Number one, we need truly peaceful, truly sincere, and truly honest debates. People must organize and be completely honest, or it creates chaos and confusion. And people sort of babble on, right? A Babylon system, if you will. They sort of babble on instead of solving problems. This creates a toxic environment that is conducive for mass shootings, right? When you don't have these sincere debates, when you don't have sincere discussions in a sincere society, a bunch of insincere people are everywhere, and some of those people end up doing mass shootings, especially when we're talking about America. That is a fact. Point number two, America needs honest and valid role models. The existing role models do not move people to not kill people to any significant degree. What they do is encourage people to live a reckless life, or they are squares who gather other squares who are not likely to do mass shootings anyway. Again, the existing role models are like a rock star, a rap star, okay, or some reckless church person who is not encouraging people to not live a reckless life anyway. Or they're squares, in church or otherwise, who gather other squares who are not likely to do mass shootings anyway. You might like those role models, but they're not solving this problem. They might meet your church needs, whatever that might be. And again, I don't belong to any church, and I don't approve of any other religion, but that's a story for another day. But that doesn't what they're doing does not solve the mass shooting problems. Okay. Think of the Board of Education as something that has made people bored of education. They're bored, right? They're not excited. That's key here. And as a result, has created lots of groups that have a criminal mentality. Also, they've helped create them, they create them, what have you. Also, many groups want to put white conceptions and LGBT conceptions out there only. So there's a lot of groups that think that the Constitution is only limited to white and whitewashed and LGBT cultures. And there's people in the military who want to push that line super tough, and other groups, social clubs, that want to push that line tough. And that's a huge problem, huge problem. There's people who market products who want to limit things to that so they can sell more products. There's all kinds of people who want to push that line. And so there's a difference between something that's limited to a white conception, a whitewashed conception, or an LGBT conception, something with universal appeal. That's key here. It's a huge part of the problem is we live in a country that says you have a constitution, but then turns around and says, hey, you better be white or whitewashed or LGBT or all the above or whatever. If you think about it, you'll know that I'm right, but I want to make sure I don't go over time in this video. Okay, so this cocktail has prevented a lot of people from finding their way to a more logical and ideal universal point of reference. For example, if the Romans would have said to Jesus as a character in the story that he has to be in Roman culture and he has to be a white Roman or an LGBT person, they would not have followed him. So the universal, historically in Western culture, according to the most people in Western culture, is something that wasn't in the boundaries of white, whitewashed, and LGBT washed. Yet, here in this country, we see that insistence. And it's not just the right wing. Look at the left-wing politicians. They're all white or whitewashed or LGBT. So we see that that's a huge problem here, because the way the truth and the life transcends mere racial supremacy or racial insistence or LGBT insistence. No offense to anybody, you should know that I'm right beyond any doubt. You should know that this has to be said beyond any doubt. Okay. And again, I don't want to make it about me, but to make a long story short, I'm the perfect point of reference, and other ones are just too boring and conformist or too evil, etc. I know a lot of people start whining about when I bring up why that is. So if you want to know why that is, put it in the comments. I have playlists that give it away. I'm not going to refer to the specific playlist that gives it away in this video, so people have no excuse, because people actually use the fact that I point to myself as someone who people should follow, which is what you would expect someone who makes YouTube videos to do, to say that, hey, we can't let people see it that way. In fact, many people would argue I went too far already. That's stupid, right? And that's how far gone this society is. And you can imagine it pisses me off, and somehow it pisses off people who have a lot less discipline than I do, and they go shoot up a church or something. Shame on you people for having that scale. Shame on you. There's so much blood on your hands. Shame on you. Okay. Point number 3. The government should allocate money to combat the occult and Satanists and their movements with truth and not existing propaganda. And I'm not saying that they should censor them. It's a very important distinction. I am not saying they should censor them. I'm saying that they should put out things that make it clear that it's stupid and wrong and silly and evil and immature to be an occultist or a Satanist. They need to make that clear. But the unofficial religion of the state seems to be Satanism, right? It's money, it's greed, it's a dog-eat-dog society, it's a crony capitalist society, it's an oligarchy. These things are associated with Satanism, the cult of the empire, right? Babylon's system. But that's a story for another day. Point number 4. They must also combat clandestine groups, including government-run cults and groups. Now, some of you say, whoa, you're a conspiracy theorist. What do you think Epstein is? Epstein was. And is the network of people that he was involved in, they're still out there networking with each other, right? So we know for sure that there's government-run groups, sex cults, politically active groups that enforce American culture, what have you, out there manipulating things, raising all hell, and people are partially responding to that one way or another, whether they're taking direct orders from them or they're responding to a society that's broken because of them. That is something that needs to be combated if we're going to have a comprehensive and thorough approach, a wholesome approach to combating mass shootings. Point number 5. The government should end all social media censorship. Again, the government should end all social media censorship as soon as possible. Generally speaking, a huge part of mass shootings and other terrorist acts is the resentment that builds as a result of censorship. I've been saying this for years. I used to use the example of Muslims who were fundamentalists, terrorists, radicals, whatever you want to call them, okay, who their families would be killed in a bombing or something, and it would radicalize them. They'd be very angry. Why? Because they couldn't express their pain. No one was hearing them. People were like, the government in this country, they're like, so what? Or thank you for contacting us. We'll take that into consideration. Okay, so they're not having effective debates, and they're not having effective discussions, and they're not meeting the type of people who would point them in a different direction because they're censored. Okay, no matter how hateful your speech is, you shouldn't continually censor someone. If someone says that people should, go out there and do something stupid like kill people or something for no reason, then that video should be taken down. But their account should not be censored. Their videos shouldn't be suppressed. Okay, so when I say all censorship, I mean all unreasonable censorship. And if you have to choose one or the other, you're better off leaving the video on for good measure than taking it off. Because few things piss off mass shooters as a group more, maybe not every single one of them, but as a group, generally speaking, more than internet censorship. These are people who are mad, they have grievances, they want to be heard, they want to discuss things. They want to either be corrected on some level subconsciously, or they want people to concede their point, and they want to see things, change occurring. And we have an oligarchy where they're suppressing people and putting up straw men, and people are not being represented correctly. And I've seen this time and time again. I've seen it in my research into white nationalist movements, white supremacist movements. I've seen it with black extremists. I've seen it with Muslims. I've seen it with Jews. I've seen it time and time again with Satanists. What they all tend to have in common is they're all pissed off about being censored, and they're not just kind of pissed off, they're very pissed off. Need some examples? Look at Nick Fuentes, Lily Gaddis, what have you. Okay, point number 6. The government should spend at least $1 billion a year more on undercovers, and they should perhaps create another law enforcement agency to account for the infiltration of the government to some degree. Now we see that both parties weaponize this department and that department, okay, and the implications are rather disconcerting. And so we see that there needs to be more law enforcement, for nothing else, to give the government no excuse. Because they're saying everyone wants to shut down law enforcement, and this stuff keeps going. So not only should we spend money for those things there, but on top of that, another $10 billion at least for just more law enforcement in general. Okay? Because we don't want the government to have an excuse for not stopping these terrorist attacks that they are very likely causing, mind you. And there's a lot of evidence. I'm not saying that as a conspiracy theorist. I'm saying that as someone who's done research and who looks at the facts and does a clever and wise and insightful and smart analysis with, a sense-filled analysis, and someone who gets to the bottom of things. Okay. Point number 7. They should form a group that talks honestly about government psyops and the implications of the symptoms of psychological operations, including gang stalking, that we see all the time here in America. For too long, too many people have been playing stupid about domestic operations. Okay, maybe it's part of something connected to the Patriot Act or this, that, and the other thing. It's stupid. Americans would have never voted on this gang stalking, organized harassment, fuming, poisoning. These things are taking place. There's plenty of witnesses. There's hundreds of people who have testified that they're occurring. Okay, the government hasn't done a good job of making them seem crazy. Maybe about 10% of them look crazy. 90% of them look very sane. It's retarded to act like these things aren't taking place here. And there are millions of Americans who know for sure that they are. It's time that they just talk honestly about it. They should have never done it in the first place. What have you. Point number 8. Clearly, the government should acknowledge gang stalking and end it immediately. So not only should they acknowledge it and talk about it, but they should also end it immediately. Point number 9. The government should stop playing stupid about the governing class and how it funds terrorism all over the world. America has a long history of doing these things, including the historical relationship between the KKK and the other fraternities and the governing class. There are millions of people in social clubs, secret societies, country clubs, fraternities, you name it. And just their country clubs generate billions of dollars a year, and so many people work for these are massive organizations that have a dramatic effect. It's even called fraternizing with people. Frats and fraternizing. Socializing and social clubs and social media and social engineering, they're all connected ideas. No one has ever even attempted to refute me on that. They know that I'm right. People tend to be just quiet and just, don't respond to my videos. You see, on TikTok I get hundreds of views. On YouTube I get a lot less views. We see that they don't respond because they know that I'm right. Point number 10, all places where people meet should have trustworthy members that have firearms on site. Okay, you can have a special color for that location for a school. You say that school wears green in terms of have some kind of vest if they go for their gun, right? So say there's a shooting and the principal has a gun, or half the teachers or whatever, and they put on a vest that the students don't know about that's a certain color that's designated for that school, so people can tell the difference between them and a mass shooter. When the law enforcement comes, they simply detain that person, okay, get him out of there, and law enforcement takes it from there. Point number 11. They should pass a tax to end homelessness and pass all my plans. There's a lot of plans I have. Healthcare analysis plan, 10% redistribution over 50 years plan, my 5.44 trillion plan, region arguments. I have lots of different plans, oversight plans to make sure the money is spent effectively, right? Budgets for a lot more oversight, citizen committees and other committees, and comparing to private purchases. I have lots of plans that would very much help the situation. Now let's get through the 10 causes and let's wrap this up here. So the top 10 causes of mass shootings. Number 1, poor governance. They even allow psyops. That's horrible governments. They allow domestic psyops that are clearly provoking people to mass shootings. They have some kind of other agenda going on, is what the overwhelming amount of evidence suggests. Point number 2, cultural failures. I think it should go without saying. It's a long story for another day. I'm almost out of time here. I'm just going to go through this list. 3, censorship. 4, irrational political movements. 5, a lack of discipline. 6, a broken economic system. 7, a lack of mental clarity. 8, boredom. 9, a lack of freedom. And 10, misplaced, again the key word here is misplaced hate. It's okay to hate if it's a righteous hate, because this word has, it's semantics. It's a vague word. You could hate the devil, right? You could hate the idea of child molesters refusing to change. But if your hate is misplaced, okay, in a way that's universally, logically misplaced, that is a problem. Thank you.